On a quiet Sunday morning in July 1961, in the crisp mountain air of Ketchum, Idaho, a 61-year-old man woke up before his wife. He walked softly downstairs, past the sleeping house, and opened the door to a basement storage room. He unlocked a heavy padlock, took out a double-barreled Vincenzo Bernardelli shotgun, slipped two 12-gauge shells into the chamber, walked upstairs to the front foyer, put the twin barrels to his forehead, and pulled the trigger. The man was Ernest Hemingway, the ultimate symbol of unstoppable, rugged vitality. A man who had survived anthrax, malaria, skin cancer, pneumonia, severe diabetes, 2 consecutive plane crashes, a ruptured kidney, a ruptured liver, a fractured skull, and mortar shrapnel ripping through his legs in World War I. He had boxed champions, hunted apex predators in the Badlands of Africa, swam with sharks, and stood in the middle of active war zones just to watch the bullets fly. The world looked at him and saw an immortal titan, a man who had looked death in the eyes 1,000 times and laughed. So why did the man who spent his entire life fighting to survive suddenly decide that he couldn't live another day? To understand how a god falls, you first have to understand how he was built. Our story doesn't begin with a man. It begins with an 18-year-old boy from Illinois who was desperate to prove he wasn't a coward. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, young Ernest tried to enlist in the Army but was rejected because of a defective left eye. Refusing to stay home while the world was burning, he volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross in Italy. On the night of July 8, 1918, while handing out chocolate and cigarettes to soldiers on the front line, an Austrian mortar shell landed right next to him. The explosion blasted fragments of metal into his right leg. Despite his own catastrophic injuries, Hemingway picked up a wounded Italian soldier and carried him to safety, getting shot in the knee by machine gun fire along the way. When the medics finally cut his trousers off at the field hospital, they pulled 227 pieces of shrapnel from his flesh. He was 18. He had been given the ultimate ticket to the theater of death, and he survived it. But something shifted inside his skull that night. While lying in the hospital in Milan, he fell deeply, hopelessly in love with an American nurse named Agnes von Kurowski. She was 7 years older than him. When the war ended, she wrote him a letter breaking off their engagement. That double blow, the sudden realization of physical mortality, followed instantly by the destruction of his first innocent love, forged the architecture of the Hemingway psyche. He learned a cold, dark truth very early. The world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills. From that moment on, Ernest Hemingway made a subconscious vow. He would never let life, or a woman, or death catch him off guard again. He would be the one holding the whip. In the 1920s, he moved to Paris. It was the golden age of the lost generation. Hemingway was poor, hungry, living in a cold flat with his first wife, Hadley, but he was surrounded by giants. F. Scott Fitzgerald, James Joyce, Ezra Pound, and the fierce matriarch of modernism, Gertrude Stein. It was in the damp cafes of Paris that Hemingway did something revolutionary. At the time, literature was flowery, dense, and stuffed with adjectives. Hemingway looked at a blank page and decided to strip the English language down to its bare bones. He invented what became known as the iceberg theory. The theory was simple. If a writer knows enough about what he is writing about, he can omit things he knows. The dignity of movement of an iceberg is due to only 1/8 of it being above water. You don't write the emotion, you write the hyperspecific cold physical actions that cause the emotion, and let the reader feel the rest in their gut. When he published The Sun Also Rises in 1926, followed by A Farewell to Arms, the literary world suffered an earthquake. Suddenly, this handsome, broad-shouldered young man with a sharp mustache wasn't just a writer. He was the voice of a generation that had been traumatized by war and left with no gods to pray to. With fame came money, and with money came the dangerous creation of Papa. As the 1930s rolled in, the quiet Parisian writer transformed into an international daredevil. It was as if sitting at a desk wasn't enough to keep the demons quiet. He needed the adrenaline of the void to prove he was still alive. He became obsessed with bullfighting in Pamplona, viewing the matador as the only true artist because he was the only one who worked inside the exact geometry of death. He bought a boat named the Pilar and hunted 1,000-pound marlins in the Gulf Stream. He went on massive safaris in East Africa, bringing down rhinos and lions. When the Spanish Civil War broke out in 1936, he ran straight into the crossfire as a journalist. When World War II erupted, he didn't just report on it. He armed his fishing boat with machine guns and patrolled the coast of Cuba looking for German submarines. Later, he attached himself to the American infantry in Europe, taking up arms himself and leading a ragtag group of French resistance fighters into Paris to liberate the Ritz Hotel bar. He was living 10 lives at once. He was married 4 times, discarding wives the moment the domestic routine began to feel like a cage. He drank with a legendary, almost terrifying capacity, starting his mornings with champagne, moving to frozen daiquiris in the afternoon, and finishing with bottles of heavy red wine at night. The public ate it up. Magazines put his bearded, wind-burned face on their covers. He was the ultimate man's man. But what the public couldn't see was that the persona of Papa Hemingway had grown into a massive, hungry parasite, and it was slowly eating Ernest alive from the inside. By the early 1950s, the world thought he was washed up. His latest book had been critically panned. People whispered that the great lion had lost his teeth, that he was just a drunk playing a caricature of himself. Hemingway's response was a masterpiece of human defiance. In 1952, he published a short, sparse novel about an old Cuban fisherman who hooks a giant marlin, fights it for days, only to have it eaten by sharks before he can bring it to shore. The old man and the sea won him the Pulitzer Prize, and 2 years later, the Nobel Prize in Literature. It was the ultimate comeback. But the universe has a cruel sense of irony. Right at the moment of his absolute triumph, his body decided to collect the debt of a lifetime of abuse. In 1954, while traveling in Africa with his 4th wife, Mary, their sightseeing plane struck a utility pole and crashed into the heavy brush. Hemingway survived with a sprained shoulder. The very next day, they boarded a second plane to get to a hospital for medical care. That plane exploded upon takeoff. When the rescue crews found them, Hemingway had used his own skull as a battering ram to bash open the jammed door of the burning fuselage. Newspapers around the world actually printed his obituary, believing nobody could survive 2 plane crashes in 24 hours. Hemingway crawled out of the jungle alive, reading his own glowing obituaries over a glass of gin. But the damage was permanent. He had suffered a fractured skull, 2 crushed spinal discs, a dislocated arm, internal bleeding, a ruptured liver, a ruptured spleen, and his vision was permanently compromised. The final act of Ernest Hemingway is not a story of a roaring lion, it is the quiet, agonizing story of a trapped animal. Unable to live the hyper-physical life that defined him, his mental health fell off a cliff. He developed severe hemochromatosis, a genetic disease that causes the body to absorb too much iron, damaging the organs and the brain. The lifelong heavy drinking, which used to be a point of pride, now acted as a supercharger for severe depression. By 1960, he was living in Ketchum, Idaho, consumed by an intense, terrifying paranoia. He stopped his friends in the street, pointing at innocent men working on the road, whispering that they were FBI agents sent to audit his taxes. He claimed his phone was tapped. He claimed his mail was being opened. His family thought he was losing his mind. They told him it was all in his head. Decades later, under the Freedom of Information Act, the truth came out. J. Edgar Hoover had placed Ernest Hemingway under active FBI surveillance during the 1940s and 50s. His phones actually were tapped. His mail actually was being tracked. The man wasn't completely crazy. He was being hunted by his own country's intelligence agency, and the sheer isolation of nobody believing him broke his spirit. Desperate to save him, his wife Mary checked him into the Mayo Clinic under a false name. The standard treatment for severe depression in 1960 was aggressive electroconvulsive therapy. Over several weeks, they sent high-voltage electric currents through the brain of the greatest living writer in the world. The shock therapy destroyed his short-term memory. When he sat back down at his typewriter to do the one thing that had always saved him, to write, the words wouldn't come. The crisp, beautiful sentences that used to flow like clear mountain water were gone. He sat at his desk, staring at the blank paper, and wept. He later said to his biographer, "What is the sense of ruining my head and erasing my memory, which is my capital, and putting me out of business?" It was a brilliant cure, but we lost the patient. Which brings us back to that quiet July morning in 1961. When a man defines his entire existence by his absolute agency, by his ability to catch the biggest fish, shoot the fastest animal, drink the strongest men under the table, and write the truest sentences, what happens when that agency is taken away? For Hemingway, a life without the power to dictate his own terms wasn't a life at all. It was captivity. And Papa Hemingway did not do captivity. His father had shot himself. His sister Ursula would later commit suicide. His brother Lester would commit suicide. His granddaughter Margot would commit suicide. It was a dark, generational shadow that tracked the Hemingway bloodline like a leopard in the tall grass. On that July morning, Ernest simply stopped running from it. We look at the wreckage of his final years, and it is easy to call it a tragedy of ego. But if we look closer, we see the absolute truth of his own iceberg theory. The loud, boisterous, violent persona of Ernest Hemingway was just the 1/8 showing above the water. The other 7/8, the deep, quiet, sensitive boy who got his heart broken in an Italian hospital and spent the next 40 years trying to write a sentence clean enough to explain the pain of being alive. That was the part hidden beneath the freezing waves. He left us with a warning. Wrapped inside a masterpiece, he taught us that a man can be destroyed, but not defeated. In the end, the only thing strong enough to take down Ernest Hemingway was Ernest Hemingway himself. If this journey into the past has captivated you, don't forget to leave a like. It's the best way to support this project and keep history alive. To continue unraveling the mysteries of the most fascinating figures who ever walked this earth, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss our next trip through time. Until next time.